Hello, I'm Dr. Hans Toki, and today is another social insight. The topic today is, why are people poor? It's a question that's been asked across the millennia. Indeed, an ancient proverbial saying went like this: the poor you will always have with you. Ancient Jewish teaching said this: love your neighbor as yourself. And then went on to measure whether a king was good or great or really bad by judging them according to the level of care they gave to the poor. So the poor, maybe for the Jew, was social conscience. But Confucius said this: in a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of. Indeed, where we worship wealth is where we have a poorly governed country. Think about that for a minute. How do you view poverty? When someone is homeless and you see them there on the sidewalk, is this good government or bad government that has them there? Or perhaps you're driving and you come to an intersection and a person walks up to the windshield with a "please give me money" sign. Do you roll the window down, or do you put it up and leave it up and look away and drive away? Or how about this one? You're on the internet and you're browsing and you see some horrible pictures of global poverty. Do you just scan away from that picture, or you drive deeper into it? So Confucius and the Jewish theories, based really on a religious civil belief, is that the poor will always be with you, and they should serve as a social conscience. What Plato had much to say about poverty. Lauder, in his article, elaborates a little bit about how Plato wrote on this in the Republic. And there are 4 moral ethics in relation to this. The first one is this: justice, in the sense of morality of individuals and societies, is far more important than the acquisition of wealth. So justice, that everybody has something, is more important in morality than whether a person is richer or poorer. Secondly, moderate wealth is important for its function to enable humans to live a moral life. In other words, if you're too rich or you're too poor, you'll fight for those riches. Either the poor will fight to get what they need to survive, and the rich will keep the poor away so they don't steal it away from them. So moderate wealth is important for its function, for us to be able to live a moral life and not fight each other. Number 3, Plato said, poverty and excessive wealth have negative consequences for both individuals and societies. So where we see the rich and the poor clashing with one another, and so much government policy, private policy, and our obsession with the rich and the poor, we begin to fight each other. Why? Because we don't believe in true moderate society of equality. And 4th, Plato, he said that desiring and possessing excessive wealth disrupts and destroys moral integrity and internal harmony in both individuals and societies. Let me read that again. It's a mouthful, isn't it? I can barely say it. Desiring and possessing wealth disrupts and destroys moral integrity and internal harmony in both individuals and societies. I think we need to unpack that a little bit. So if I want to have too much wealth, it disrupts the system. If I don't have enough, I get mad at other people for having more. This destroys one's moral integrity or their feeling of rightness and goodness and virtue. And there's no internal harmony or what's inside, being good with oneself inside or with one another in both the individual and the group as a whole. I found this interesting a number of years ago. I was serving it as a mobile soup kitchen, and the bus pulls up, and there they serve soup to the homeless that are in this vacant lot. And that particular day, I was volunteering, and I was in the lineup chatting with predominantly elderly male, middle-aged and elderly male who were very, very poor, who had come up to this food bus. And I just wanted to say hi and greet and be friendly. And then he pointed at me and then pointed at the apartment condo towers that were adjacent to the vacant lot where the mobile food bus was, and said, "I hate those people." In other words, I was representing, probably because of the way I looked, that I didn't look homeless. I was representing to him the people living in the condos who were rich. So in being poor, even at being given grace by another human and by getting free food, that still did not help him overcome this fight against the rich. Well, none of us want to be poor, do we? Be honest with me. Do you really want to be poor? Because really, if our popular society is a reflection of anything, the mantra of success is the acquisition of wealth. We worship the successful icons in business, in government, in entertainment, in sports. I mean, since when was the last time you dialed up the name of someone who was a working poor person at your Walmart and looked for their facts? You're more interested in seeing what the latest sports star or fashionista is wearing or what their statistics are in the game last night. This is the way we are. Being poor is viewed as some sort of social malady. Indeed, in teaching sociology, poverty often is included as a social problem. So it's a problem to be poor, I suppose. I mean, what about you? Do you want to be poor? Most of us would say, no, I wouldn't. We wouldn't resort to a vow of poverty as some gurus, some religious leaders, or some social justice advocates would have done. We really don't want to be poor, do we? Well, sociologists have analyzed this in many different ways. And what I want to do here today is highlight a few of these important social theories of why are people poor. Two big words journey around this topic anytime someone is discussing it at an academic level: stratification and global stratification. But the term stratification is about stratas. If you think of rock, there's rock stratas, the different sections up and down of the stratas. But in poverty studies, it is all about the Gini index, or the social classes, where one rates in the strata from the top to the bottom. What the Gini index measures, G-I-N-I, is the top 2% of earners versus the bottom 2% of earners. So they compare them. And in certain countries of the world, they're leading indicators of the difference between the rich and the poor. For instance, all across Latin America, the Gini index is very high. South Africa has a very high Gini index. What does this mean? There's a lot of rich people and a lot of poor people and not a lot in between. The growing countries in the Gini index in the last 20 years or so are 4 countries: China, India, the UK, and the United States. The United States always was seen as kind of a place to go to. But now you have other countries who their Gini index is rising in global technology. And with the rising of global technology and global travel, we're seeing global stratification, global classes. Weber, the classic sociologist, described this as socioeconomic standing, where one was on the strata. But he saw it as broader than just money. Education, social connections, schooling in class etiquette, upper class etiquette or lower class etiquette, Elijah Anderson, later in poverty studies and race studies, argues about the code of the streets, which is an etiquette rules for those who are poor of how you get to survive on the streets. Of course, the upper class at the same time, there is the little black book in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which determines who gets invited to the social parties and who doesn't. And indeed, to sustain yourself in this SES, the socioeconomic standing of Weber, you have to have money. Simmel, the sociologist, distilled it down to just money. Whoever has money has purchasing power. That's who's rich compared to who's poor. Marx, he really was a social theorist more than a journalist than a grand classical sociologist. But he said that there is a class war between management and workers, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. He argued that management was in a fight with the workers. So management and the corporation is only interested in profit at the expense of the worker. So it's a movement of funds from the management to the workers that benefits the workers is not the desire of the bourgeoisie. But the proletariat's desire is we want some more of that wealth to come over to us. We'll talk about this a little bit later in what we call wage transference. Classic sociologist Durkheim argued that class differences are really just the way things are. Using the theory of structural functionalism, he said the structures of societies, the systems of the societies are set up in such a way that it creates social rules where people function within their specific class. It's just the way things are. Well, the classic sociologists still haven't answered why are people poor. They've given us some social theories. Well, let's move a little bit more modern. Some sociologists have shown these theories to be true. For instance, Brown, the investment analyst, he's the late Brown, he talked about wage transferability in a global economy. So he saw what's happening in the business world with institutional investors is the goal is for the investment class to travel the world to find the best investment in order to transfer wages to their own location. So for instance, a couple of elements of this would be technological advance. If we can create machines to do the work of the workers in some third world country, then we can get the natural resources and produce that material somewhere else in order to increase our profit. Or it could mean that we have mechanization of certain things, or we might keep some workers, but we want them to do it more efficiently. So old style traditional methods are useless because we need new methods to do this. So we have this. Friedman in The Lexus on the Olive Tree talks about the electronic herd as part of this, seeking like a best profit pasture, where you see the grass around me here. Similar to that is investors would, like cows going to a pasture, a herd would look for what's the best place we can find the best grass to eat. In other words, which politician, which workers can we take most advantage of in order to stay there and feed for a while and set up our manufacturing plants and take the resources. And then we'll ship those products back to the United States, to Europe, and whatever other large economy will buy these raw products. Closer to home though, I'm going to highlight 4 theorists that have really talked about the American situation, which I think relates very much to any Western society. The first one is this. Emerson talks about the lazy butt syndrome. Have you ever heard about this? He is poor because he doesn't want to work hard enough. There's this idea that comes to us through even sociologist Weber of the Protestant work ethic, that the harder you work, the more money you make, or the more successful your work is. So if you think of a farm, the harder I work the soil in the farm, the more harvest comes up. And this has found its way into American society, that we work harder and harder and harder and harder in order to get more and more. So the lazy butt syndrome has an argument that the poor are poor because they don't work hard enough. Social Darwinism, with Charles Spencer in the mid-1800s, argued that in the same way that evolution of the species is a survival of the fittest biologically and organically, for instance, a predator survives over the next and next and so on, we get to the highest form of predator, which is the human over other all living beings, the evolution of the species. He argued this happens socially as well, and with social class. So the highest evolution of the species socially and economically is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, or the WASP, because the WASP has race and privilege in order to survive. And this unleashed in the mid-1800s in America a whole wave of both theoretical and, surprisingly enough, theological beliefs that there was a manifest destiny for the WASP to be the fittest and to survive the fittest. And we've seen through the last 200 years almost this embedded racism and embedded racial privilege that comes through us from social Darwinism, a belief system that the survival of the fittest is the natural order of being. Lewis, and later Moynihan, talk about the culture of poverty. This is where one has grown up through generation upon generation upon generation of poverty. And it creates a fatalism, a belief that I can never get out of this, and I'm going to be poor. Mare Winningham, in her portrayal of a poor, rural, white young woman with a child, in the movie God Bless the Child, shows how she moves to the city and then attempts to find a new life in the ghetto. And as she moves to the different shelters and the different ways to try and get her and her young daughter out from rural poverty and to make it in the city, she's completely unsuccessful. And at the last part of her distress, she ends up with a social worker. And the social worker just asks her, why don't you just go back home? And in this classic generational poverty style statement says, my mama been poor, my papa been poor, we always been poor. Can't go back now, my daddy's got diabetes. Illustrating this generational fatalism that lives and breathes in the culture of poverty. Similarly, Elijah Anderson in his Code of the Streets shows how in order to survive on the streets, you have to build a certain behavior pattern, a language pattern, even both a verbal language and a nonverbal language in how you speak and act in order to survive the streets. The problem with it is it doesn't work well in the other classes. So there's this generational culture of the streets that embeds some to forever live in the inner city. So the culture of poverty. And finally, the fourth one, Wilson argues, blame society. Simply, systemic structures and not enough government support. Wilson argues that what really happens is people in society don't give to the broader systems in order for the systems to take care of people. So he advocates, of course, for a much more equal society than other people do, and many other people do today. Let's raise the cost of government so government can take care of the poor. Of course, the problem is this, is if you give the tax money to the government also has people self-interested in it, that their goal is not to help the poor. Their goal is to keep their votes. So there isn't necessarily this redistribution of wealth that Wilson argues for that takes place there either. So we have all these ideas of why are the people poor. I think we know that there's no simple reason why the people are poor. It really is a multiplicity of reasons. There's a lot of reasons. But what I hope it does do is cause us to ask some questions. Is it necessary to have income inequality in the world? Is the proverbial statement, the poor you will always have with you, just the way it is, to serve as a social conscience for others? What's the benefit of income inequality? Is there something good for the rest of society to see the poor so it forces them to more selflessness instead of selfishness? What's your opinion of the American dominance of the global economy? The idea that America can save the world's economy, or to broaden it out, that the Western capitalist societies or even the European social democratic societies are the answers to the rest of the world's economy. Though certainly China and India would want to debate that very strongly. But what's your opinion of this? Is it right? Is the American military the world's police? Should it be? And what is the connection between the American military and international economics and stratification? Does the military actually, and the American relationship to it, actually ensure that some countries are not dominated and taken over by oppressive regimes that would hurt them even more? Or does the American military promote inequality in protecting global stratification and the movement of economics and the electronic herd to take economies out of some parts of the world? But I think it gets even more personal than this. Would you buy a cute purse or nice sneakers if you knew it was made by a sweatshop with labor that is super cheap and being oppressed by others? Would you pay a higher price, actually, for a non-sweatshop product? I mean, would you buy if you knew it was 20 bucks more, if you knew that it was made without inequality? Are you willing to give that 20 bucks extra? So you have your own ideas and reasons why you see people are poor. And people have stereotypes about the poor. What have you done for someone who's poor? Mother Teresa says this. Listen carefully. We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this type of poverty. And this gripping final statement, let us touch the dying, the poor, the lonely, and the unwanted, according to the graces we have received, and let us not be ashamed or too slow to do the humble work. Why are the people poor? Let's reflect on this. This has been a Social Insight. Have a pleasant day, everybody.